In this video, I'm going to cover 9 of the most common logical fallacies that are prevalent in our society today. They are ad hominem, or attack on the person, questionable cause, opinion is fact, red herring, hasty generalization, post hoc, either or reasoning, straw man, and slippery slope. Okay, so let's start with ad hominem, or attack on the person. This is a very, very simple logical fallacy, and it is exactly like it sounds. This is where you're attacking the person rather than their actual argument. I'm going to use an example of a debate throughout these different logical fallacies between who is the greatest basketball player of all time, LeBron James or Michael Jordan. Okay, me personally, I think it's Michael Jordan, but again, that's outside of the scope of this actual video. Instead, I'm just going to be identifying fallacies within each argument. Okay. So, for example, if I were debating with someone who is the greatest player ever, and I were to say, wow, you think LeBron is the greatest ever? You must be a moron. Right? That'd be an ad hominem attack, okay? Or attack on the person. I'm not actually arguing against his position. I'm not saying, hey, here's why your argument is incorrect. I'm just saying you're a moron. Okay? That's ad hominem or attack on the person. Then we have questionable cause. This is where the speaker asserts evidence that does not produce the conclusion that they actually claim. Right? So an example, I'm going to give you a couple examples here. If I saw my friend discipline his dog very harshly, and from that I assumed, you know what? He must dislike his dog. Right? That evidence doesn't actually produce that conclusion. There's a lot of reasons that somebody might discipline their dog that don't have to do with them actually disliking the dog itself. Okay. Another example of this, going back to the LeBron Michael Jordan debate, might be Michael Jordan won 6 Finals MVPs, therefore he's the greatest basketball player ever. That alone doesn't actually produce that conclusion, right? Now that might be one thing that helps produce that conclusion, but there are a lot of other factors. So I didn't actually give you enough evidence to reach that conclusion. Okay? Next, we have opinion is fact. Again, this is a logical fallacy that is very simple. It's exactly like it sounds. This is where I state my opinion as if it's a fact, right? So if I were to say Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player ever, that's a fact. Okay. The next one we're going to cover is called red herring, and this is where you insert irrelevant information into the argument, often to divert attention away from the real issue, right? So if we were arguing not about who the greatest basketball player ever is, but instead, who's a better player between Michael Jordan and LeBron James? And I start losing the argument, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, you know what? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is better than them both, right? It's not actually relevant to the real issue. That's not what we were debating. We were simply debating who was better between Michael Jordan and LeBron James. Okay, so that'd be a red herring. Okay. The next one is called hasty generalization. This is where you argue from a specific example as if it is representative of the entire population without the actual evidence to back it up. So let's say I was driving through a new city, right? I had never driven through, let's say, Omaha before. And while I was there, somebody cut me off very, very aggressively. And from this, I assumed, oh, wow, I guess people in Omaha drive really aggressively. Right? Based on that one example, that may or may not be true, right? But based on that one example, I can't actually draw that conclusion. I'm arguing from one specific example as if it represents the entire population of Omaha, right? So that would be a hasty generalization. If I could go back to the Michael Jordan and LeBron James debate, let's say I went to a Bulls game and Michael Jordan scored 63 points, he must be the greatest player ever. Right? Now, he may have played like the greatest player ever that night, right? But if I don't take into account all the other evidence, right, and I only argue from that specific example where I'm like, hey, he scored 63 points on this night, he's the greatest ever, right? It'd be a hasty generalization. Okay. The next logical fallacy is called post hoc. Okay, post hoc is where you assign the wrong cause to the effect. Okay, so a really good example that I like for this logical fallacy, the amount of ice cream cones consumed in a day in a given location and the amount of drownings in a given day in a given location are positively correlated. Meaning, right, that when people eat a lot of ice cream cones, there's a lot of drownings, right, in that area. Okay. Now, if I were to, from this evidence, I were to say, okay, guys, ice cream cones must be causing people to drown. Right? We've all heard the term correlation doesn't equal causation. Okay? Now, these two things are correlated, but one is not causing the other. In fact, there's an underlying cause of both of these things. Right? When it is hot outside, people tend to eat more ice cream cones. When it is hot outside, people tend to swim more, right? And the more people who swim, the more drownings there are. Right? So ice cream isn't what was causing people to drown. It was simply more people were swimming because it was hot outside. Okay? Any sort of superstition, right, as well is likely going to fall under the post hoc logical fallacy. Right? Every time I wear my lucky socks, Michael Jordan's team wins. Right? Therefore, my socks are causing Michael Jordan's team to win every time. That's not actually true. Okay? All right. Next, we have either or reasoning. This is where you contend that there are only two options, when in reality, there are more. Right? A good example for this would be if I were to say, you're either a Republican or a Democrat. That's not actually true. Right? You could be a libertarian, you could be an independent, you could be part of your own political party, right? You could have beliefs from both different parties, right? You could incorporate all the Libertarian Party as well into those beliefs, right? There's a lot of different options, right? So if I were to contend that there were only those two, right, I'd be guilty of that logical fallacy. If I were to say the greatest basketball player ever is either Michael Jordan or LeBron James, you cannot make an argument for anybody else. That's not really true, right? We could make an argument for a lot of different people. We could make an argument for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson, or Larry Bird, right? Various different people, Wilt Chamberlain, right? There's a lot of different people we could make arguments for, okay? The next logical fallacy is called straw man. This is where you set up a false version of somebody else's argument and then you attack it, okay? An example I can think of for this one, right? If I said that one of the reasons I think Jordan is better than LeBron is because he averaged more points in a league that averaged less points, right? For example, so back in the 90s, right, the average amount of points scored was somewhere around 96 points per game, right, per team, right, each team. And now the average is somewhere around 108, right, so 12 more, right? So if I were to make that argument and say, I think one of the reasons Michael Jordan is better is because he averaged more points than LeBron, even though teams were scoring significantly less points in this era, right? And let's say you were to come back and say, so what you're saying is that scoring is the only thing that matters in basketball, right? That's not actually what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is this is one of the reasons, right? And I think he was a significantly better scorer because of that. I think those numbers, his numbers, right, should be inflated even more than they are for that reason. Okay, so that'd be straw man. This is one I encourage you guys, if you keep up with politics in any way, keep an eye out for this because it is rampant. Each side is constantly misrepresenting the other side's argument and trying to make them look stupid and then attacking that argument that they just set up. Okay, so that's straw man. Okay, finally, the last logical fallacy is called slippery slope. This is arguing that taking one action will lead to a more severe action. Okay, now there are a lot of examples of this as well in politics, but running along the same example I was using before between LeBron and Jordan, if I were to say, wow, so people really think LeBron is better than Jordan, what's next? Are we just going to forget about any past great players? Well, that's not true. You could make an argument LeBron's better, right, without forgetting greats of the past. Right? Now, I understand that it may be true that people tend to be prisoner of the moment, right? And we tend to get wrapped up in what's right in front of us, but that doesn't mean we're just altogether forgetting the greats of the past, okay? So that'd be an example of slippery slope. So those are the 9 most common logical fallacies in our society today. I encourage you guys to start to really, in TV and politics, even with your friends, things like that, start to look for these different logical fallacies because they are all over the place. And people don't tend to know that they're actually using a logical fallacy. You may be guilty of it as well as myself. So keep an eye out for them, guys. Thanks a lot.